Good morning, everyone. It's 10 o'clock, so I think that we can start the meeting for today. I just want to check that our secretary Jean-Luc is on board. Jean-Luc, are you there?
Yes. Good morning, Mr. President. Thank you very much for checking on me. Yes, I'm here and ready to go. Thank you so much.
Okay, then we can start. And so, Excellencies and distinguished delegates, welcome back to the plenary meeting of the 2020 annual session of the UN Women Executive Board. I think that we had a good and productive day yesterday. I was very happy with the interactive nature of our discussion and also the engagement of the UN women leadership in our debate, and now it's our second day, and we can resume the session. Just to update you on how we are doing in terms of the decisions, and I think that we are sort of currently negotiating 4 decisions, and I'm very grateful to all the facilitators with their sort of hard work. But I understand that we don't have results yet, so I'm just reminding everyone that we have a lunchtime to finalize the decisions. And of course, I am flexible in a way that if we need more time, I'm here this evening as well. But I would just want to say in a way that I very much encourage negotiations to reach reasonable solutions, and we have lunchtime to do that. And just to share my own perspective, so I think that we are all keen on meeting timetables, but I think that substance is more important. So even as we are looking forward to making all the 4 decisions on time today, I think that we should also be very mindful of the substance and be sure that they adequately reflect the sentiments of the whole membership. So this is my encouragement to all the negotiators, and thanks to the facilitators, and of course I am personally available at lunchtime if I can help with the process in any way. But let's turn to our agenda, and we have agenda item 4 on policy and program matters. Under this first item today, the board will be presented with an update on the implementation of recommendations contained in the independent victim-centered review of the UN Women policies and processes on tackling sexual exploitation and abuse and sexual harassment, as well as a related management response. I welcome the following UN Women colleagues to the podium. Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, Undersecretary General and Executive Director of UN Women. Phumzile, it's wonderful to have you with us today as well. Åsa Regner, Deputy Executive Director for Normative Support and Program Results. And Anita Bhatia, Deputy Executive Director for Resource Management, UN System Coordination, Sustainability and Partnership. And many thanks to Åsa and Anita for your active participation yesterday. It was very much appreciated. And then we have Purna Sen, Executive Coordinator on Addressing Sexual Harassment. Prasun Chakraborty, Director at Interim Human Resources. Munia Lakdar Hamina, Workplace Relations Advisor, Human Resources Division. Lisa Sutton, Director of the Independent Evaluation and Audit Services, and of course Jean-Luc Boris, Secretary of the Executive Board. I would like to invite the Executive Director to make some remarks. So without further ado, Phumzile, the floor is yours.
Thank you, President. Can you hear me?
We can hear you perfectly.
Okay, thank you. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good morning again. I also echo your words, President, and thank the distinguished delegates for a very lively and interactive discussion yesterday. So we meet today to discuss progress that we have achieved in implementing the recommendations of the independent review of UN Women's sexual exploitation and abuse and sexual harassment policies and procedure. I must just say from the onset that we affirm our commitment to fight all forms of SEA and SH. We also believe in the zero tolerance for misconduct and assure you that all the cases we become aware of, we report to OIOS for further investigation. We know that SEA and SH are both expressions of power and gender inequalities, as well as violation of fundamental human rights, and it can make the workplace unbearable to those who become in any way a victim of this behavior. So UN Women has prioritized the creation of the culture of equality and mutual respect. And we know that you are never done with this work. You have to actively sustain it. We are also doing this by making sure that the workplace environment or for our personnel is guided by necessary standards, policies, and processes that again sustains the environment we desire. We use also our expertise on ending violence against women who are actively engaged, not just within UN Women, but are also engaged and contributing system-wide in the work and effort that is led from the Secretary General's office. And we're collaborating with various stakeholders within and outside the UN. And we have continued to improve our internal coordination while remaining relevant in ongoing global efforts where we are helping to frame and set standards to work towards the elimination of sexual harassment at the workplace wherever it exists. This has included cooperation with member states, of course, cooperation with groups of friends, activists, academics, victims, survivors, law enforcement, private sector. And the beauty of this is that also as we contribute, we continue to learn from these colleagues. And we recognize in all of this work that victims and survivors must be at the center of our responses if justice is to be served. We had the Deloitte's independent review of UN Women's policies and procedure to tackle SEA and SH. And they established an important baseline for us to build on. We are now working towards taking action that is required from this report. There were 12 recommendations that were made there, and these recommendations are interdependent. We have implemented and completed 60% of those. The remaining ones are work in progress, and they are dependent on the progress being made on the initial one. So we could not finish and move on the remaining ones without fully establishing the first recommendations. We are, however, we think on course to be able to move all of the recommendations forward. We welcome the opportunity to discuss the progress that has been achieved, which is described in greater details in the background notes that has been shared with you. But I'd like to underline 3 highlights in this work. The promulgation of the updated policy on prevention, harassment, sexual harassment, discrimination, and abuse of authority. This clarifies the roles and responsibility of all key stakeholders, and it includes support provisions for affected personnel. We have established a local sexual harassment action plan, which is required in all our duty stations. And we've launched the pilot program on respectful workplace facilitators. Mr. President, distinguished delegates, I'm sure you must be feeling that we do have so many committees and efforts, but I don't think that there's a shortcut for this. We do need all of these points because of the complexity of the issue we're dealing with. So the respectful workplace facilitators is important to create peer support initiatives to foster an enabling harmonious work environment. And we also have an internal task force on addressing sexual harassment, which meets fortnightly and takes forward coordination and standard settings. And the TORs are also made available to you. I do hope if my other colleagues are going to speak, they can actually give you some interesting examples from this work. But this task force convenes colleagues from various divisions, country, and regional offices. In our coordination work, we are also mindful of the Deloitte's recommendation to join the dots between sexual harassment, violence against women, and other forms of discrimination. We are also part of the CEB task force on addressing sexual harassment within the organization and the UN system-wise. We continue to work in setting international standards that address sexual violence. We have a publication entitled, What Will It Take? Promoting Cultural Change to End Sexual Harassment, which was published in September 2019. We recently published Stepping Up the Challenge Towards International Standards on Training to End Sexual Harassment, which provides guidance on what constitutes effective transformative training. We have conducted some exploratory training building on our own guidelines in Eastern and Southern Africa with staff from a range of UN agencies, and that of the United Nations office in Vienna. 2 publications on sexual harassment have been translated into Braille, a first for UN Women. In the next few months, we will also take forward the collaboration on and guidance on sexual harassment and disability, sexual harassment in the informal sector, and internal guidance note and analysis on the global social movement against sexual harassment. Through all of this and listening and bringing the experience together, we have, I think, even broadened our own insight into this work. There's always something new to learn in this work. Certainly, victim-centered approach remains core to this work, and we continue to want to collaborate with you so that we can improve our efforts together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Edie Phumzile, and I really want to echo your message of zero tolerance on any misconduct, where sort of UN Women is setting a high standard, and this really sort of is a strong message from the UN Women leadership, and I think that sort of it is sort of working well. And distinguished delegates, just to remind you that as mentioned yesterday, we will hear presentations under agenda items 4 and 5, and then the floor will be open for your reaction on both items. Now let's turn to audit and investigation matters. Our item 5. Please welcome the following colleagues to join the virtual podium. Ben Swanson, Director of Investigations Division, Office of Internal Oversight Services, Malika Mukhidinova, Chief of the Internal Audit Service, Marian Virsch, Chair of the Advisory Committee on Oversight, Moez Doraid, Director of the Management and Administration Division, Sarah Hendricks, Director of the Policy Program and Intergovernmental Division, Anna-Karin Jaatvors, Director ad interim for the Strategy Planning, Resources and Effectiveness Division, and Melissa Ballen, Chief of the UN Women Legal Office. There will be 3 presentations under this agenda item: the report related to internal audit and investigation for 2019 by the Director of the Independent Evaluation and Audit Services, the report of the Advisory Committee on Oversight by the ACO Chair, and the management response by the Deputy Executive Director for Resource Management, UN System Coordination, Sustainability and Partnerships. Without further ado, Ms. Sutton, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, Mr. President. Greetings, Excellencies, distinguished Executive Board delegates, dear colleagues. Thank you for joining this Executive Board session for the 2019 Annual Report on Internal Audit and Investigation Activities. Since you have the full annual report, this presentation will provide you with highlights of the internal audit and investigation results from 2019. As explained as the responsible person for investigation services provided by OIOS, I will also provide a summary of their work, and we have them also with us for this session. Next slide, please. Today's presentation will cover 3 areas. First, I will quickly recap how Internal Audit Service fits within the other oversight providers within UN Women. Secondly, I will provide highlights from the annual report on internal audit and investigation activities. And finally, I will provide a brief update on how we are adapting our work for the COVID-19 crisis. Next slide, please. Let me first start with an overview of the internal audit function. Next slide. If we look across UN Women, we see that there are 5 main providers of oversight services. The Internal Audit Service exists to provide independent assurance and advisory services on UN Women's governance, management, risk management, and internal controls. The UN Board of Audit, or the external auditors, primarily exist to provide an independent opinion on the accuracy, completeness, valuation of the financial statements of the organization. The UN Office of Internal Oversight Services, or OIOS, is an independent body of the UN Secretariat with a wide and vast mandate. For UN Women, OIOS provides investigation services. The Joint Inspection Unit is an independent oversight body of the United Nations, mandated to conduct system-wide reviews, assessments, and evaluations to promote efficiency, effectiveness, and coordination across the system. And the UN Ethics Office provides ethical consultations to the organization, handles the organization's financial disclosure program, and provides services with regards to protection against retaliation. Next slide, please. Taking a very brief closer look at the internal audit function, because it is rather new in-house. As part of the independent evaluation and audit services, independence from management is assured through the direct reporting line to the Executive Director and through her to the Executive Board. The Advisory Committee on Oversight also provides a number of protections with regards to the independence, but also the effective functioning of the Internal Audit Service. In terms of what the Internal Audit Service does, it provides independent assurance and advisory services to help enhance accountability and improve the effectiveness, efficiency, and sustainability of UN Women's work. The service has the freedom to determine its work plan and report without hindrance. It has full free access to all records, personnel, and premises. The service follows international professional standards in the scope of its work, covers all of UN Women's field operations, regional offices, headquarters, as well as its systems and processes. Next slide, please. Now I will turn to an overview of the annual report on internal audit and investigation activities in 2019. Next slide. The Internal Audit Service is required to provide an annual overall opinion. And in 2019, based on our work performed, the service concluded that overall, no significant weaknesses were identified in UN Women's governance, risk management, and internal control processes that would seriously compromise the achievement of the entity's strategic, programmatic, and operational objectives. This opinion is based on the implementation of the internal audit work plan, the results of the individual audit activities, the progress of management to agree and to implement actions to audit findings, and the service also takes into account the results from the Board of Audit. This is the second opinion of the internal in-house audit service. And in rendering it, I do draw attention to the individual conclusions in each audit report, including our 2 process audits. But I would also like to highlight overall that in rendering this opinion, the service made 2 overall recommendations: that management, UN Women management, should enhance its second line of defense. By doing this, by clarifying business and risk owners for operations, program, and for performing end-to-end process risk assessments to ensure that the right controls exist at the right places and that they are functioning. The service also recommends that management should further strengthen and demonstrate its accountability through implementing an annual statement of internal control process. Next slide, please. Looking at the results of the internal audit service in 2019, the service delivered 13 internal audit and advisory reports. This includes 8 country program presence offices and 2 thematic cross-organizational audits. The service assigns a rating or conclusion on the results of each audit, and in 2019, there were 4 satisfactory, 4 some improvements needed, and 2 major improvements needed ratings provided. In addition, and as part of its work plan, the service also completed 3 advisory reviews, which I will touch on briefly. The service tracks the implementation of the recommendations that it makes, and at the time of the preparation of the annual report, all except 3 recommendations from the period before 2019 were implemented, and management had already addressed 50% of the recommendations that we had made in 2019. So we believe that this shows a commitment of management to continuous improvement and to respect of the recommendations that we are making. Next slide, please. This slide presents a summary of the recurring issues by number of recommendations. And in 2019, the highest numbers were in the areas of implementing partner management, program and project management, travel management, and organizational structure, authority, and capacity. To look at it another way, these are the areas that, based on our 2019 work, we believe that management needs to focus on most in order to be able to deliver effectively and efficiently, and to be able to protect its limited resources, its funds, and its time. Further details on these and other areas are available in our annual report and also in the individual engagement reports themselves. Next slide, please. The value of the internal audit service goes beyond assurance activities only, and in 2019, in line with its plan, the service delivered 3 major advisory reviews. This included a maturity assessment of the UN Women risk management function, a gap analysis of the UN Women project cycle, and a risk assessment of the UN Women Haiti country office. Summaries of these advisory reviews can be found in the annual report. The service also contributes as an active independent observer at the UN Women senior management team. It provides input and updates to policy and procedure, and it works together with the independent evaluation service to sharpen our overall collective analysis of governance, process, impact, and efficiency issues. Next slide, please. Now, turning to investigations and recalling that OIOS provides these services to UN Women, please allow me to summarize their work. In 2019, there were 52 new allegations received by OIOS related to potential misconduct in UN Women. And there were 44 allegations closed in 2019. Of those closed, 1 allegation that was closed by UNDP, the former investigations provider to UN Women, and this was reported in last year's annual report. 43 allegations were closed by OIOS. And here I would like to highlight that one allegation may include more than one type of potential misconduct reported. Analysis shows that the majority of allegations were about potential prohibited conduct. Prohibited conduct is a term used to describe potential harassment, sexual harassment, abuse of authority, and discrimination. The remaining allegations were around potential personnel, fraud, recruitment irregularities, misuse of office, and other types of potential misconduct. Next slide, please. Looking at the allegations closed in 2019, 9 allegations were closed after initial assessment by OIOS that an investigation was not warranted. 1 allegation was closed and referred to the UNDP Office of Internal Audit because it was within their jurisdiction. 25 allegations were assessed by OIOS as not warranting an investigation and were referred to UN Women for potential management action. And 8 investigations were completed and reported in 2019. And of those, 4 allegations were substantiated, 4 allegations were not substantiated. UN Women takes action on the basis of investigation reports in line with its legal framework for addressing non-compliance with the UN Standards of Conduct. The Executive Director's report on disciplinary measures introduced last year and annexed to the management response to the annual report is a very positive accountability and transparency mechanism and provides details of measures taken in 2019. In terms of the referrals, IEAS has established a tracking system and workflow for the confidential and appropriate handling of referrals together with legal and human resource colleagues. In terms of supporting investigations, in addition to being the administrative conduit and active record keeper for the handling of reports, referrals, statistics, and billings, IEAS supports requests for information for OIOS about personnel, projects, and processes. And in 2019, IEAS has also analyzed governance and control weaknesses identified in the course of investigations and fed these into recommendations to management and also back into our audit processes. We do this within our limited human resource capacity for internal audit. We know and understand the pressure on scarce resources for UN Women and for everyone these days, but I think it's worth highlighting that further resourcing in this area would help to increase our ability to provide proactive integrity and counter fraud efforts, as well as to increase awareness on the appropriate handling of potential misconduct. Next slide, please. Coming now to the end of this presentation, I would like to highlight how the Internal Audit Service is adapting in the context of COVID-19. Next slide. The COVID-19 pandemic has and will continue to impact our 2020 work plan. We are fortunate to have made an early start in 2020 with 3 field missions. However, we've also needed to postpone for the time being some field work. We are looking into how to work remotely, and in some cases it works. In some cases, we find that without easy access to documents, partners, and projects, it does affect our ability to conduct our work. We will continue to monitor the situation and adapt and report our plans accordingly. On a positive note, our 2020 work plan did include several thematic organizational-wide process engagements, and these are generally progressing as planned. So while the COVID-19 crisis has been a major disruptor, it has also provided an important moment to be adaptive and agile to help UN Women to deliver effectively and efficiently. And in this regard, we've been helping to support the organization as an independent advisor through our engagement in different working groups and processes. This brings me to the end of my presentation. In closing, Mr. President, I would like to reaffirm the Internal Audit Service's full commitment to supporting accountability and strong governance, effective risk management, and smart control systems in UN Women. I would like to thank the IAS team and OIOS for their work in 2019. I would like to thank the Advisory Committee on Oversight for their service to UN Women, and I would like to thank UN Women Management for the respect they provide to the independence of the function and to their receptiveness and commitment to continuous improvement. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you so much, Lisa. And next, Ms. Wirsch, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. President. I believe that we have a slide presentation to come up if Malika would put it up. I will briefly go. We have submitted a report which is available to the body, and I think you have seen it. Essentially, the report covers a variety of things. Next slide, please. It has an introductory section that just talks about our terms of reference. For those of you who may not be familiar with the Advisory Committee on Oversight, which had been formerly called the Audit Advisory Committee, our goal and our task is to provide the Undersecretary General with independent external advice on accountability and systems of risk management. We're composed of 5 independent external experts with skills in a number of governance and accountability areas, including internal audit, investigation, evaluation, risk management, et cetera. And as our terms of reference point out, our goal is to assist the ED in fulfilling her oversight responsibilities in accordance with best practices. Next slide, please. In line with our terms of reference, the annual report focused on 2 key areas. The Advisory Committee held a number of meetings. They're all outlined in our report, had interactions with a number of UN Women staff. But essentially, our report covers 2 key areas: the oversight functions review and internal control and accountability. Essentially, in terms of oversight functions, next slide, please. The areas that we are reporting on and which we spend time on are the internal audit service activities. You've just heard Lisa's report. You have her report. The independent evaluation service, you'll be dealing with that later on today. OIOS investigation division and the investigation services they provide UN Women. The ethics function, which is performed by in an interagency agreement with the UN Ethics Office. We met with them, but also has impact back into UN Women in terms of ethics activities that they engage in. And of course, we interact with the Board of Auditors and have private meetings with them at each of our meetings. Lisa talked about the Joint Inspection Unit. We interact with them. We have no oversight of them, obviously, because they're an independent unit. We interact with them on a number of occasions, reviewing their reports, answering questions, and so on. And just this last month, I reviewed an extensive report on enterprise risk management from them. Next slide, please. Here's some basic conclusions that you'll find in the report. We've said a lot more than this, but these are the basic conclusions from our oversight function review. All of them are working well, providing very useful information and results to the organization. For audit, we have concluded that they've engaged in important advisory assignments and reviews in addition to their formal audits. They've shown a number of areas in terms of the advisory areas and in the audits where low levels of maturity in management processes need to be addressed. Lisa referenced some of this. They also call for the assurance mapping and identification of accountable business owners to have a robust internal control framework. We applaud that and have encouraged that in our report. In terms of evaluation, we have been very pleased to have a number of interactions. We had a special evaluation session with that office earlier this year. And we're interested in some further exploration of the impact of evaluations and how all evaluation activity in UN Women is organized. Interested in the uses of evaluation. The uses to which evaluation is put. We've also met with the investigation unit. We note the number of allegations returned to UN Women for action as for management issues, and we'd like to follow up on that. We have noted last year and this that in the initial setting up of the IEAS, the work related to investigation management inside IEAS had not been considered in terms of their resources. We would ask that that be considered in future budget considerations. This year, we met with the ethics function at the UN Women, and we have a couple of recommendations with regard to that. We believe that the ethics function should be, the ethics liaison function should be high enough placed in the organization to have an impact. We have noted that there's been great progress on the communications of prohibited behaviors and expectations of conduct, and we applaud that in UN Women. And we, with regard to the Board of Auditors, we have advised, we look at several aspects of the management of recommendations and the closure of recommendations for the UN Women audit functions and also the Board of Auditors. And we would advise that there begin to be a focus on root causes. What caused this recommendation to arise in the first place? Not necessarily that it existed and it's gone, but what caused it in the first place. And so we'll be talking to UN Women about that kind of thinking with regard to these recommendations in future. Next slide, please. The second half of our report has to do with internal control and accountability in UN Women and the conclusions that we have made. We have 5 basic conclusions. In a number of our reports in the last several years, the former advisory committee, audit advisory committee, and now the advisory committee on oversight has indicated that the shortfall of resources against budget has a great impact on the UN Women's footprint, and that the inability to fund the footprint or rationalize the footprint to a fully resourced set of offices creates risks for the organization. And so we have raised that again this year in terms of how the resources of the organization and its footprint affect its risk profile. I've spoken before in terms of the work we undertook about the accountability structures. We note that change management initiatives have begun. There are some new accountability structures in UN Women. We applaud that. And there still needs to be done. I think UN Women is now well on the way to this, but the committee would like to see how the newly appointed risk officer, corporate risk officer, how a risk management committee is organized, the terms of reference for the business review committee, which is a new entity to bring accountability into the organization, is managed. The third item, which is related to accountability structures, is how the internal governance processes, which Lisa mentioned in terms of conclusions that have come out of audits and evaluations, is that staff and managers need to have clarity about their roles and responsibility and how they fit into corporate goals. This is essentially related to the fourth point, which is a strengthening of the first and second line of defense. The ERM maturity review, the gap analysis that she mentioned, the implementing partner audit, they all show the need for identification of accountable offices and business owners and the strengthening of those two functions, the first line of defense and the second line of defense in the organization. The last area that I want to speak about is some work that the committee does. It's important work to look at the financial statements and the financial systems and how they're working. And the committee believes that the UN Women has strong attention to financial policies and procedures, and that it's likely, I don't know this, but it's likely that it's well on its way to yet another unqualified audit, and that there has been a lot of emphasis on those strong procedures. That's essentially a summary of what our report says. There are other things in there, but I want to thank you, Mr. President, and the ED and others for your attention, and I'd be glad to answer questions at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Many thanks, Marianne. And now I would like to give the floor to the Deputy Executive Director, Ms. Bhatia, to respond on behalf of the management. So Anita, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Director of the Internal Oversight Services, the head of our Audit Advisory Committee, dear colleagues. On behalf of UN Women, I'm very pleased to share with you the highlights of our management response to the report on internal audit and investigation activities for the year which ended 31st December 2019. Next slide, please. Overall, we are very pleased that we have received an opinion from IAS that there were no significant weaknesses that had been identified in the entity's governance, risk management, and control processes that would seriously compromise the achievement of UN Women's strategic and operational objectives. This is actually a very welcoming confirmation of UN Women's steady growth, and most importantly, of the operational maturity that we have brought with that steady growth. We're happy to note that we achieved a 99% implementation rate in addressing the recommendations issued prior to 2019. This is the 5th consecutive year when our implementation rate has actually surpassed the corporate rate of 90%. To address IAS's overall recommendation, UN Women efforts are ongoing to explore the most effective way to prepare a relevant statement of internal control. We are mindful that this is something that we've been asked to do, and we are looking at what is the best and most efficient way to do this. And we also hear you on the need to strengthen our second line of defense at regional offices and at headquarters under a well-networked matrix organizational system, and this is something we are exploring as well. Slide number 3, please. We know from experience that actually it strengthens our organization to follow through and complete the recommendations that we receive. And we welcome all recommendations in that spirit. So what we've seen from the 2019 recommendations and from completing them are some results that we wanted to share with you. First, we will promptly initiate and have initiated actions on the recommendations received. And some of the business results from having followed through, number one, for effective governance, we have actually identified a main accountable business process owner who can create a coherent organization-wide implementing partner management framework. And this will include the development of an end-to-end partner monitoring system. Number two, we have been focusing on improving program results monitoring and timely project reports submission. We have enhanced program design with a particular focus on exit strategy so that projects can be more sustainable and that there can be national ownership of projects. Through the establishment of Gender Equality Bilateral Partners Group, we have been able to do a better job. I would not say that we are completely there yet, but we have been able to do a better job of aligning our donor funding with regional programming priorities. Yesterday, we discussed the need for us to have more flexible and predictable core funding so that we are not driven solely by opportunistic donor priorities. And part of this work success will depend on our ability to also increase our core funding. Next, regional programs with cross-border significance and complementary results at the country level are also being pursued. Our human resources strategy and recruitment plan is increasingly focused on supporting more effective program and project implementation. And here it is worth mentioning that our human resource function has actually got HR business partners on the ground in the field, which is certainly helping towards this and also helps towards the larger objective of creating a networked and knowledge-based networked organization. We have advocated for the establishment of the gender scorecard and gender and human rights training for all UN country teams. And we actually have undertaken in the past year, in 2019, the first ever gender and human rights training to UN sister agencies in a few pilot countries. And finally, we have updated our risk management policy. We have introduced streamlined communication protocols, and we appreciate the recognition that our communication on several important aspects has actually improved, and we have created escalation protocols so that important issues can be escalated to senior management in a timely way. Next slide, please. Here's a quick update on the status of prior year's audit recommendations. Happy to report that 2 of the 3 outstanding recommendations that had been issued prior to 2019 have completed management actions, where 1 has already been assessed as implemented by IAS. And the only recommendation that remains outstanding is the ongoing enhancement for a systematic mapping between the results management system and the Atlas system, which currently don't speak to each other efficiently enough. This is, of course, resource intensive and does require a critical structural change so that there's better synergy between the 2 systems. Next slide, please. And we are pleased to note that 2018 recurring audit recommendations for implementing partner management have been assessed as implemented. And some of the things that we have been working on and that we are proud to report back to you on is, number 1, sustained project results that move us towards greater national ownership through clarity and more thoughtful partnership, increased assurance on the proper use of project funding, mitigation of risks for not achieving program results through more careful and more rigorous assessments of implementing partner capacity, better use of contract modalities and contract modalities that are fit for purpose for the particular contracts that we are signing, and more efficient monitoring of program results based on risks. We can confirm that the 1 remaining long outstanding and 3 high priority recommendations from 2018 have in fact been implemented and have resulted in the following. Number 1, streamlining of processes to support civil society organizations' capacity development through the promulgation of a small grants policy and procedure. Number 2, a marked improvement in the gender scorecard to advocate for gender equality. Number 3, well-defined roles and responsibilities and synergized private sector resource mobilization in the new RM strategy and expressed now in a new RM policy, and resilient and continued business operations, including during the ongoing health crisis. Next slide, please. On investigation, happy to note that we have taken very detailed and careful account of the information related to OIOS's investigation activities in 2019, and to restate that the leadership of UN Women under the direction of our executive director is committed to offering a supportive and respectful workplace for all personnel. Our workplace concerns are dealt with in agile and holistic manner, ensuring that we are actually paying more attention to an issue which has just been mentioned in the prior presentation, which is we are looking more at what are the root causes of some of the conflicts so that we can address them. The 2019 disciplinary report also demonstrated that UN Women actually has taken very prompt and appropriate action to implement its zero tolerance policy on any cases that were substantiated. We are working on an inclusive workplace strategy that promotes diversity, inclusion, and UN standards of conduct. And as we continue to work on this, we will take account of what we are hearing, both from our staff and from the outside world, on issues relating to racial injustice. We have revised our policy on prevention of harassment, sexual harassment, discrimination, and abuse of authority. And we have, as you heard in the first presentation, strengthened our position and taken a more victim-centered approach. Finally, in closing, next slide, please. We would like to thank the Executive Board for your attention to these issues. We would like to reassure you that management takes these recommendations and findings very seriously, and most importantly, that we are committed to action, follow-up, and monitoring of all actions. We thank you for your continuous support to UN Women. Over.
Thank you so much, Anita, and thank you all for the comprehensive presentations. These are important topics for the board. And I now open the floor for member states' interventions with respect to the two aforementioned agenda items, policy and program, and audit and investigations. You are encouraged to ask for the floor through the raise a hand function. And please ensure that you are sort of easily recognized, including your function. And again, as yesterday, I will limit the interventions to 2 minutes, and I apologize for my noisy alarm clock, but it's part of keeping time. So, and since we have other agenda items to cover this morning as well, the first intervention goes to the DPR of the Netherlands, Mark Zellenraad. So Mark, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Jukka. And thank you, Phumzile, for your excellent presentations. Thank you for UN Women for your strong leadership on sexual exploitation, abuse, and sexual harassment, combating it. And of course, all of the staff of UN Women for all your unwavering commitment to strengthening the mainstreaming of a culture of integrity, of transparency, of accountability. And I will be delivering this statement on the implementation of recommendations in the independent review on tackling sexual exploitation, abuse, and sexual harassment on behalf of quite a few member states. Jukka, I will not take 2 minutes per country, so don't be afraid. But I will probably be speaking a little bit longer than 2 minutes because of the amount of member states, which are Australia, Austria, Argentina, Belgium, Bulgaria, Canada, Colombia, Denmark, Georgia, Germany, Hungary, Iceland, Ireland, Japan, Lithuania, Mexico, Montenegro, New Zealand, North Macedonia, the Republic of Moldova, Sweden, Switzerland, Turkey, the United Kingdom, the United States, and of course my own country, the Kingdom of the Netherlands. So it's quite a few, but of course we're going for 193 the next time. On the leadership, as this group of states, we recognize the critical role of UN Women in delivering system-wide leadership and change on this issue. UN Women must set an example for other UN entities in taking this zero-tolerance approach, which has been mentioned quite a few times, when it comes to sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment. COVID-19 already mentioned a couple of times, also by Ms. Sutton. And we commend the resilience and the steadfast commitment of the UN staff who continues to assist vulnerable populations during this pandemic. And of course, even though it is this major disruptor, as Ms. Sutton says, of course, it can never be an excuse to stop paying attention to this incredibly important topic of combating sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment. And we urge, of course, that this work continues, including the reporting of allegations on investigations, accountability, and survivor and victim care. And of course, we welcome that we see that this work continues. And we're also pleased to see all the effort that UN Women is doing to ensure staff well-being in this unprecedented times, and practice, of course, which should and will undoubtedly continue beyond the pandemic. Please allow me to make 5 points on the implementation of the recommendations in the independent review, which are the following. First, on policy and on governance. We welcome the review of the prevention of harassment, sexual harassment, discrimination, and abuse of authority policy, and we are pleased to see specific reporting requirements for regional directors and heads of office. It is important to ensure that there is a clear monitoring and accountability framework with key performance indicators and targets to measure the impact of new initiatives. Second, on prevention and communication. We welcome the progress made, including the team and the leadership culture assessment. We would encourage senior management to provide an update on the results of this assessment, including key areas for improvement in the action plan. We're also encouraged by the further operationalization of the ClearCheck database. Thirdly, on capacity building in the field. We welcome focus on building capacity at the country level, including through the development of local action plans. We urge UN Women to maximize efficiency through pooling its capacity building efforts with other UN entities, donors, and non-governmental organizations. In addition, we welcome the mapping of existing resources on SEA, as well as an update on the results of this exercise to address the gaps identified. We encourage UN Women to ensure this reflects the importance of engaging in-country mechanisms. Fourth, on implementing partners. We welcome the revision of the UN's procedure for selecting program partners and commitment to the ongoing system-wide efforts in developing common assessment tools and training of implementing partners, including contractors. Lastly, and fifth, on reporting and investigations. We subscribe to the need to maintain multiple reporting mechanisms that are robust, comprehensive, and confidential. We urge UN Women to continue to provide more transparency on reporting around allegations and action taking, however. We note that UN Women has reported very few allegations to the UN-wide online SIA reporting system, including none for 2020, which really seems very odd. So we would ask for an update on this. In conclusion, let me reiterate our shared commitment to tackle sexual exploitation and abuse and sexual harassment, and our collective recognition that we must maintain a victim-centered approach in all that we do. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mark. And next, I would like to give the floor to the permanent representative of Morocco, Ambassador Omar Hilale. Cher collègue, vous avez la parole.
Merci beaucoup, cher ami Jouka. Mr. President, the Kingdom of Morocco supports UN Women's commitment to the ongoing UN system-wide policy to address and eliminate sexual harassment and sexual exploitation and abuse, as well as its proactive and victim-centered approach to preventing and addressing sexual harassment and sexual abuse. Morocco welcomes the updates on the implementation of recommendations contained in the independent review of UN Women's policies and procedures to tackle SEA and SH, and the commendable progress made by UN Women so far. We especially welcome effort made over the past year in the field of awareness, raising of personnel, context-specific training sessions, which focus on upholding a victim survivor-centered approach throughout the organization, the commitment to accountability, and the creation of an accessible, dedicated intranet page to all personnel. We welcome the mapping exercise conducted to identify existing resources in SEA and SH, prevention and response at the headquarters, regional and country offices levels, which will definitively help perform the gap analysis and reorient the resource management plan where needed. We note with concern that upholding confidentiality in the process might pose a challenge in practice, namely when dealing with accountability and transparency. We would like to underline that confidentiality forms a necessary condition for victim survival-centered SH and SEA approach, and a key to reinforce the confidence in the investigation process. In this regard, we welcome the steps made towards ensuring that the balance between maintaining confidentiality and properly addressing allegations is adequately attended to. We invite UN Women to take all necessary steps to ensure that the areas in progress are completed within the planned time frame, and namely with regards to the adequate allocation and prioritization of resources at regional and country office levels, ensuring sufficient resources and effective distribution of capacity across the organization, and ensuring maximum reach of training materials. We understand the challenges posed by COVID-19 on focusing on face-to-face training is challenging. In order not to lose the momentum on preventing and addressing SH and SEA, we request that the e-learning training sessions be more creative, dynamic, and scenario-based in order to avoid their repetitive nature. Finally, we have the confidence that the UN Women will continue to live up to its commitment of working toward achieving a safe and caring work environment for all its staff at all levels, free from sexual harassment and sexual exploitation and abuse. We look forward to having regular updates on the implementation of the recommendations contained in the report of the Independent Task Force. We believe that a safe working environment for all will contribute to the accomplishment of the organization's mandate. I thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you, Ambassador. And next, I would like to give the floor to Susan Beer of Sweden. Susan, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Madam Executive Director, we align ourselves with the statement just delivered by the Netherlands, but would like to take this opportunity to ask a couple of additional questions relating to SEH, and then also make a few remarks on the audit and investigation matters. To begin with sexual exploitation and abuse and sexual harassment, we welcome, of course, UN Women's ambitious work on preventing and responding to SEH, in particular through ensuring a victim-centered approach. And we would therefore be interested in hearing a little bit more about UN Women's efforts at sharing these experiences and increasing learning and awareness amongst other entities within the UN system, but also beyond, for example, with partners and member states. Then we would also be interested in knowing if you have been able to implement the very ambitious and planned interactive training at regional and country levels during the ongoing pandemic, or if you had to adjust this work somehow, and we're interested in learning how. Because we feel it's important, of course, to not down prioritize SEH during the ongoing crisis. Then on audit and investigations, we would like to, again, particularly express our appreciation for the report of the Executive Director on disciplinary measures and other actions in response to misconduct by UN Women staff members. We find it important that UN Women continues to be transparent also in measures taken in relation to prohibited conduct and other misconduct, such as harassment and abuse of authority, which goes beyond sexual exploitation and abuse and harassment. And we further call on UN Women to prioritize addressing recurring audit recommendations, particularly related to implementing partners, program and project management, as well as travel management. We're pleased to hear that the audit recommendations of last year related to implementing partners have been completed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Susan. And next, I would like to give the floor to Ambassador Victoria Suleimani, another sort of fellow member of the UN Women Executive Board. So, Victoria, the floor is yours.
Thank you much, Mr. President. I take the floor quickly to make some comments on the issue of violence against women and girls, which we are aware is one of the greatest human rights violations. In the executive director's opening remark yesterday, she clearly stated that this is one of the issues the UN Women has focused on in the response to COVID-19, which was very encouraging to my delegation because from the Ebola crisis, our experience showed that we learned from Ebola crisis that in situations of such emergencies, there is a tendency to focus response effort more on containing the disease than the other epidemic, which is the violence against women. So, and this is the time that women and girls are forced to stay at home with their abusers. So what we learned in the post-Ebola era was that there was an upsurge in teenage pregnancies and teen moms. So, Mr. President, no one on this platform listening to me this afternoon can convince me that the international community has not been responding to this issue. Countries have enacted legislations, they have adopted administrative and policy measures to combat the surge. Even at the international level, there are human rights normative frameworks to address this issue, yet this pandemic persists. In my country, for instance, the prevalence of SGBV got to the level in 2019, wherein the president had to declare a state of emergency on rape, with increased punishment for perpetrators and outlined a plan for victims or survivors, such as free hospital care for victims of rape, created special police and court divisions devoted to SGBV and national phone hotlines to address the problem. Additional measures such as amending the Sexual Offences Act to increase punishment for perpetrators of rape. And then in March this year, we adopted a national male involvement strategy. And our First Lady is one of the chief campaigners on this issue with her Hands Off Our Girls campaign. Yet, this situation persists. So at this point, I am tempted to ask the question, if the existing interventions lack integrated understanding of the causes of this problem and its implications for our society. So this is why we continue to call for global solidarity in line with the SG's call. And we will continue to applaud the UN Women Victim-Centered and Zero Tolerance approach to tackling these issues, especially given the primacy the entity is giving to the issue of violence against women during this COVID-19. So in Sierra Leone, what do we see during this period? We see UN Women and the country team are at the front line working on this persistent issue with our government, the community, he or she male involvement strategy and advocacy to mobilize men and boys to protect the rights of women and girls in all circumstances. So to add to the impetus of this conversation, Mr. President, I hope I have not finished my time. Permit me to profile the following recommendations. State must bear the responsibility to hold perpetrators accountable for their crimes, and requisite national legal framework should be strengthened and service to survivors should be enhanced. We must make meaningful consultation and involvement of women groups and local organizations, including diverse representation of affected population facing multiple intersecting barriers to gender equality in the humanitarian planning and decision-making processes needed. We must promote the allocation of funds to address protection needs of affected population and groups and ensure funding to address all forms of violence against women during this COVID-19 and not just to focus on sexual violence. We must support women and girls networks and consortiums building to address the need of women and girls, men and boys, as well as gender minorities, especially survivors of SGBV in all its forms. We must pay special attention to long-term programming in response plans, which foster dignity and agency of SGBV survivors, women and girls. We must protect understanding of respect for diverse civil society representatives, including from marginalized groups and community. We must increase institutional capacity building by the international community to governments to implement legislations, policies, and programs to end GBVs. And then we must challenge the harmful social norms that are the root causes of SGBV and work at multiple levels to create gender equal and inclusive societies and prevent GBVs. We must prioritize integrated coordination and intervention to address SGBV in urban infrastructure, health, education, livelihood, and child protection, which are gender and age sensitive. And finally, we must strengthen and increase access to transformative justice for sexual and gender-based violence. Let me end by adding that a rapid global response will be very vital in achieving the above recommendations. I thank you very much, Mr. President. I hope I did not take too much of your time.
Thank you, Victoria. Thank you so much. And now I would like to give the UN Women Secretariat a chance to respond, and starting with the ED. So Phumzile, the floor is yours. Do we have Phumzile online, or should we move on to the Deputy Executive Director, Anita, please?
Thank you very much. First, we would like to just share our appreciation for all the different comments that we've received, and to say that we will take all comments into account. I'd like to respond just to a couple of specific things that had come up. One on the query regarding the sharing of experiences with respect to sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment. Just to note that actually one of the recommendations was that these trainings be done in person, which of course we could not do due to the pandemic. But we do take note of this while acknowledging the confidentiality considerations, and we will take this into account in thinking through how we can begin to deliver through the system some of the experience that we have garnered to date. We hear you responding now to the DPR from Sierra Leone on the need to really take account of the lessons from the Ebola crisis with respect to the spike in gender-based violence. And please know that we are focusing hugely on this issue. We are very pleased that the Secretary General has been talking very openly about this issue, and that there is a sense that we are at an inflection point where the shadow pandemic on domestic violence and gender-based violence can really get the attention it needs, both of policymakers as well as of the private sector. So we take account of all comments and reaffirm our commitment to working on them. Thank you, Mr. President, and over.
Thank you, Anita. And I can see that Phumzile is online as well. So Phumzile, is there anything where you would like to respond?
Mr. President, I would actually like to check if you could allow Puna Sen, one of our colleagues who has been working with us on all the issues of CAA and SH, to shed some light and to answer the questions raised by Sweden. Thank you. And by Netherlands also.
Thank you, Phumzile. And Purna, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you, ED. There's quite a lot to go through, if I may, but I have to confess I lost sound and image at a little point. So if I missed anything in my response, please do come back to me. I'm really very appreciative of the range of issues that that have been raised in this discussion, and I think it really reflects the interest, motivation, and understanding of the issues we're dealing with. If I may just try and run through bit by bit. Some of the questions I think are for our human resources colleagues, so perhaps Prasoon can come in around the reporting requirements and how they're being monitored. Around capacity building, I'd like to respond, and the lessons that we've learned and how we share them. But also I'd like to add a little bit around the pandemic context that we need to take on board. First of all, capacity building is something that we think we take very seriously. Now, historically, what's happened is that a lot of our colleagues who worked primarily on sexual exploitation and abuse have now had sexual harassment added to their portfolios, which is quite understandable. What we need to do is roll out adequate support for them in terms of what that means and what that looks like. And the two areas of work aren't exactly the same. There are very important links between them. Edie mentioned earlier in her opening remarks the issue of power and inequality and how they feed through all the work on violence. And that's certainly there. And in fact, we will be reflecting the discussions about these connections in a short note we'll be issuing in the very near future. But there are also some differences that need to be fleshed out. Our work around training has really tried to look at both the connections and the distinctions between them. And it also relates to the issues that our colleagues have raised around lessons learned and training. We did, as Anita mentioned, very much stress the need to do training differently. Historically, it's been done very much through a video, short interactive piece where policies, procedures, and prohibited behaviors have been shared in most organizations and institutions over the last 30 years, but that's actually been shown not to bring the changes that we are now talking about, which is about elimination, eradication, and ending of this sort of inequality. So we undertook a piece of work to think about what makes training more effective. And based on those guidelines, which are actually available on the website, we developed a new model of training that Edie referred to in her opening remarks. We've been really pleased to just pilot that because it's a very novel approach. It is absolutely face-to-face, as Anita mentioned. And it aims to create a space in which people can feel confident in saying things that are actually quite difficult and talking through what we're calling standards of practice. Part of that is exploring a term that many people have used this morning, zero tolerance, and a second term, victim-centered approaches. They're terms we use a lot, and they're certainly grown in their purchase over the last couple of years since the Me Too activists put this issue on the agenda in a different way than before. But what do they mean? We don't all mean the same thing. It's become really clear. Some people mean, when they say zero tolerance, that any report of sexual harassment, for example, will result in a termination. Others think zero tolerance doesn't mean that because some things are not, they're a very different scale or continuum of behaviors. So what we've done is we've set out, actually, I'll just wave it quickly, what does zero tolerance mean and what do victim-centered approaches look like? And if we're seriously going to do that work, it does involve trying out things, having scenario-based work, looking at how we might respond to different people in different contexts. And that's what we've been doing in the training. So we've done that in East and Southern Africa for a range of UN agencies. Sweden, the speech your point about sharing across the system. We had participants there from FPA, from IOM, from the regional coordinator's office, a number of different agencies beyond UN Women. But we were also invited from my office to deliver to UNOV, the Vienna office, which was an extremely well-attended 2-day training. We have some finessing to do of that if there's time. And because the core of this is that face-to-face training is most likely to bring effective change, it's quite tricky to move to doing online training during the pandemic. I think we'll have to think about whether there are very small groups that we do occasionally, and how you do scenario-based work and how you can ensure confidentiality, as you mentioned, Mr. President, as I think Morocco mentioned. It was an extremely crucial element of effective training. So that actually provides us a challenge. I want also to recognize what I think a colleague from Sierra Leone was saying about teenage pregnancies, but also the links to other forms of violence. There has quite rightly been a focus on domestic violence during the pandemic, where people have been shut indoors with their abusers. We have also to recognize that beyond interspousal or interpartner abuse, there is child abuse, and there is abuse of people in informal work, such as domestic workers. But also, and we're starting a series of webinars from my office on Monday looking at COVID and sexual harassment. Sexual harassment has not stopped, although we're talking about it much less. Many people have been carrying on in their workplaces. And many people have found sexual harassment has moved much more into cyberspace and online. And people are also reporting that as they go out occasionally, the nature and the extent of sexual harassment has really changed. It has increased in incidence and potentially in severity also. Those are issues that we need to pick up and look at a little bit more in depth and make sure we don't take our eye off the ball. We are, just in response to Sierra Leone's point about country office at very local level work, there is a great hunger, I think, in our colleagues, both to look at the connections between sexual exploitation and abuse and harassment, but also to have very clear guidance on how their work on sexual harassment should progress, whether it's with partners, as you mentioned, or stakeholders, or colleagues, or other agencies who often come to UN Women for advice on what to do. And we are preparing and will be issuing soon a guidance note that has been prepared in consultation with our colleagues in country offices. And on that point of internal coordination, I just want to stress that the internal task force that Edie mentioned earlier draws together colleagues from very many different parts of the organization. Our colleagues from security teams who are often on the front line of dealing with incidents, our colleagues from internal communications who shape and ensure the dissemination of messages, our colleagues from the Violence Against Women team, from country offices. Particular regions have been consistently involved in this work. But I also want to mention another point, which links to your points you've all made around victim-centered approaches. Victims, survivors, and their advocates are those who will teach us a great deal about why things haven't worked in the past and what we can do to improve them. That has to be the core element of what victim-centered approaches are about. In the task force, we have a very important place for the UN Women's Youth Council and for the UN Feminist Network, who are often the first point of contact for many victims of sexual violence and survivors of sexual harassment who may not report to the processes that are captured in our audit services, in our audit work. So ensuring that we hear from them and place their work center stage, not least of all in the points that have been raised earlier around confidentiality, is absolutely crucial to how this work proceeds. I just want to flag one other thing, but perhaps human resources will come in and say more. Please let me know if I've missed something I should have addressed. In the few months that I have left in this office and as we wind up the Office of the Executive Coordinator, we are determined and committed to addressing the issues that have been discussed at the board for the last couple of years and ensuring that UN Women sets out from a human rights, gender-aware analysis, what are the best ways of proceeding towards elimination, ending, and eradication of violence in line with the SDGs, in line with CEDAW, international standards that tell us sexual harassment is a form of discrimination and inequality. And in that regard, I won't list everything that Edie did, but we will be putting everything on the website that can be, that might be useful to you as you take this work forward. Please let me know if I missed anything. I'm happy to come back. Thank you.
Thank you, and I will give Human Resources the opportunity to respond, but before that I have one more intervention from the floor. I have Mona Tranoi from Norway, so the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, President, dear Executive Director and colleagues at UN Women. Thank you very much for your presentation today and for the background information that you have provided on the internal audit. Ours is just a quick comment and question on the internal audit issue that has received the highest numbers of recommendations, the partner management. Allow me first to express our great appreciation for the work that UN Women has already done to strengthen its management of partners. Effective management of implementing partners requires sufficient staff with the right competencies to ensure adequate management of implementing partners and sufficient control mechanisms of compliance with procedures for management of implementing partners. And we would very much welcome if you could please elaborate a bit more on your work to ensure this. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and I think that I should now give the floor to Human Resources. So Prasoon Chakraborty, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. And just to complement what Dee Bhatia and Ms. Purnasen had mentioned earlier, specifically to address the point on the monitoring and how we will monitor, because as we had reported, we recently updated our policy for harassment, sexual harassment, abuse of authority and discrimination. And we, in the new policy, in the policy itself, we have strengthened these provisions of monitoring and implementation. And just to let members of the executive board know that we have a lot of mechanisms already in place through which we report. As you know, we report on near real-time basis for any SEA allegations that are received. And that's what's reflected in the public database, that is the ICA tracker. We register any former personnel who have had substantiated allegations in the ClearCheck database to ensure that we stop hiring of such individuals within the UN system or even externally. Each year, we also report to the Secretary General and give a certification as a year-end management letter that we have reported all allegations of SEA, and we also report to the Executive Board specifically, and that's part of the documentation that we have submitted every year, that we have an annual certification to the Executive Board regarding confirming that we have reported all allegations of SEA and SH. Additionally, the annual report on the investigation activities, which is presented, which also shows how we are monitoring and implementing this. Just to also maybe add one other element is when we look at workplace issues, because it's not just some of it is SEA, some of it is SH, and there is the overall, when we talk about prohibited conduct, we're also talking about abuse of authority and discrimination. The way we do it is we have strengthened the new policy where we are, and Poorna talked about the zero tolerance approach. The document, the policy itself has a very dedicated section on what we mean by zero tolerance. And we also give opportunities for both formal and informal redressal. So we are not only looking at formal, but also informal. And we had discussed this earlier, that we are also expanding our protection from retaliation to not just the formal policy, but also informally when the cases have not reached a threshold of an actual investigation. So I think what we are doing is, in terms of the victim-centered approach and zero tolerance, the new policy is our benchmark now, based on which we approved it. It was promulgated in May this year. So we are rolling it out. We are going to implement it, of course, and monitor it. And also when there is an opportunity, we'll obviously continue to report back on the lessons learned from that. But I think I would also encourage, we have given some more details in the background documentation, including specific responses to the recommendations from the Deloitte study, where we given more details in terms of how we are ensuring that each of these recommendations are addressed. As ED said, 60% are already implemented, and the remaining ones would follow the implementation work that has been done on the previous 7 recommendations. Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. President, and I'm happy to take any other questions if there are any, but thanks.
Thank you so much. And Norway had a very concrete question about sort of audit findings involving partnerships and partners. So would, for example, Anita want to respond to it?
Thank you, Mr. President. I would just say that we really see that this is a very critical audit recommendations, and we've seen it tested during the pandemic because, of course, our ability to be responsive and to channel funding to organizations on the ground in as responsive a way as possible is a function of how much attention we're paying to this. So we are very mindful. We've taken a lot of steps, and to describe those steps, I would like to ask that Sarah Hendricks, our Director of Policy and Program, which is in charge of implementing these recommendations, be given an opportunity to speak, with your permission, Mr. President. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita. And Sarah Hendricks, the floor is yours now.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. And indeed, thank you to Norway for the question. I'd like to highlight a few things in relation to the advancements and the implementation status of actions taken, particularly in 2020, as it relates to implementing partners. Indeed, the majority of recurring recommendations implemented within the procedure for selecting program partners promulgated in February 2020. And this has been accompanied actually with extensive global training. Just to give you a few highlights about the training and the capacity building, as it sounded like this was something of particular interest. Here, our training has focused in on program and project management training accredited by PMI. We also have training that has been focused in through the change management process. And 5 of 6 regions have been trained in program and project management. So I did want to highlight for you the emphasis on training and capacity building that has taken place in support of program and project management overall, and certainly in support of programming partners. Furthermore, the IEAS recent audit issued during the 4th quarter of 2020 in terms of a progress that has been advanced has highlighted the following steps or the following achievements. Specifically, 23% of the recommendations have already been implemented by the promulgated procedure of selecting program partners. Furthermore, extensive work has already progressed significantly on a number of key recommendations, notably the draft policy and related procedures for a revised risk-based assurance policy is now ready for consultation with key stakeholders. Secondly, a draft procedure for program monitoring and reporting is being finalized before consultation. Thirdly, an end-to-end risk assessment has been initiated. Fourthly, the 3 lines of defense for program partner management and assurance is now in place. And this has been done notably after consultation with the IEAS. And lastly, the Global Task Team for Consultation of Policies and Procedures has been established. So we are certainly delighted to share this important progress that has been made. The work on implementing audit recommendations for sustained management of program partners remains an absolute priority. And we do have a target of implementing more than 80% of the recommendations by the close of this year, namely by the close of December 2020. With that, I hope this detail on the progress that has been made and the ways in which we have advanced the majority of recurring recommendations, particularly in support with extensive training, provides additional detail that satisfies the query by Norway. With that, I hand back over to you, Mr. President.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And I have still one more intervention from the floor. I have Mudita Baicharia from Nepal. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Excellency. My question is on sexual exploitation, abuse, and sexual harassment. My query is that UN Women has now policies and procedures to address sexual exploitation and sexual harassment. So how when the actions are taken at the local or regional level, how it is being perceived at the country offices or local level, because all the countries do not have friendly policies towards sexual exploitation, and the concept is yet to be perceived or widely discussed. So how it's been taken? Thank you.
Thank you. A very concrete question for the Secretariat, and I'm just wondering whether sort of perhaps Purna Sen would like to take this question. Purna, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and thank you for that question. I think it's really a very pertinent point for both sexual exploitation and abuse and sexual harassment, what the national or regional provisions are that offer protection, prevention, and support. With my brief being specifically sexual harassment, I'll just focus on that and link if I may, where relevant to SEA. For sexual harassment, every person who has been targeted for sexual harassment has the option whether or not to go through national procedures or to go through internal procedures or both. And there are some countries where there aren't provisions around sexual harassment in the workplace. Where there are no provisions nationally, their options are obviously severely constrained, and they have only the internal processes to use. And that is a problem. And so our advocacy, and Sarah may want to come in on this too, our advocacy around an appropriate enabling legal environment, one which is translates through into practice, not just legal provisions, but into practical change, are important as part of our work at a national level too. That remains a point of difficulty for those who don't really have choices as to where they go, partly because reporting in itself is problematic. The criminal justice systems or the labor laws and so on, where these laws often sit, aren't historically the most receptive to women bringing cases and being believed and being heard with some credibility. So there is work to do around making reporting a more rational process to engage in than it is now. For sexual exploitation and abuse, again, that team sits at policy level under Sarah. But the issues are very similar in terms of what provisions exist, but also what is the willingness of the states from which the originating state of the abuser or the perpetrator, what their commitments are to hold people accountable in line with the SDG commitment to elimination, in line with the commitment to zero tolerance, which I think it's really pertinent to discuss what zero tolerance means, because it needs to be more than a simple and easy and attractive expression that people use into a lived everyday reality and experience. That's where we have more work to do. But the point raised by Nepal is absolutely key. We have a lot more work to do to make protection from sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment real, and to ensure support, and to head effectively towards elimination, eradication, and ending. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Purna, and I want to thank the Secretariat for their responses. And as there are no further comments or statements, we can conclude our discussion on this item. And the Executive Board will now turn its attention to agenda item 6 on evaluation. I would like to welcome Inga Sniukaite, Chief of the Independent Evaluation Service, joining us on the virtual platform. I now invite the Director of IEAS to present both the report on the evaluation function of UN Women 2019 and the revised evaluation policy of UN Women. So, Ms. Sutton, please go ahead.
Thank you, Ambassador, Mr. President. Greetings again, Excellencies, distinguished Executive Board delegates, dear colleagues. Thank you for joining this Executive Board session on the 2019 report on the UN Women Evaluation Function. As mentioned, I'm also joined by my colleague, Inga Sniukaite, Chief of Evaluation. You have the report on the evaluation function, so this presentation will provide you with highlights on the results from evaluation in 2019. Next slide, please. This presentation will cover the revised update of the UN Women Evaluation Policy, the 2019 report on the evaluation function, and we will also provide a brief update on how we are adapting evaluation in the context of COVID-19. Next slide, please. The UN Women Evaluation Policy came into effect in January 2013, and it governs the function of evaluation in UN Women. The evaluation function underwent an external assessment by the United Nations Evaluation Group in 2014 and the Joint Inspection Unit in 2015. The UN Women Global Evaluation Advisory Committee also assessed the evaluation function and policy in 2015. These three assessments concluded that the evaluation policy provides a sound framework for evaluation in UN Women. Considering these positive assessments, the Independent Evaluation Service undertook a light revision of the policy in 2019, building on the board's direction for a review and revision of the policy if necessary. The revision was based on an assessment of the document against international standards, the needs of UN Women stakeholders, and benchmarking with relevant policies from other UN agencies. The revised policy document reflects three sets of changes, contextual changes that are relevant to a policy document, such as UN reform and the establishment of the independent evaluation and audit services, non-substantial changes to better reflect UNEG norms and standards and to improve readability, and the separation of evaluation management content to streamline the policy document. In terms of two key revisions, the revised policy moves from a fixed target to a target range of spending as a percentage of program expenditure on evaluation across the organization. The range provides flexibility to account for different size, complexity, timeframes of programs and projects as UN Women moves towards longer-term projects, while preserving budgets for evaluation and also as we move towards more economies of scale and impact through more strategic and independent evaluations. The revised policy also updates the governance arrangements for the evaluation function, where the Independent Advisory Committee on Oversight, who we heard from, takes a greater role in overseeing the performance of the evaluation function and management's uptake of its recommendations, the evaluation strategy and policy, and it replaces the Global Evaluation Advisory Committee. The policy has been presented to the Executive Board for endorsement. Turning to the next slide. In terms of 2019, our 2019 activities for evaluation. First on corporate evaluations, and these are the evaluations that the Independent Evaluation Service leads and conducts. In 2019, the service completed and presented 3 to the Executive Board on UN Women's support to governance and national planning, on UN Women's contribution to humanitarian assistance, and a meta-synthesis of evaluation findings focusing on corporate and decentralized evaluations in 2018, with a deep dive focus into findings from country portfolio evaluations. In 2019, the service also actively contributed to the evaluability assessment of the Common Chapter with the evaluation offices of UNDP, UNFPA, and UNICEF. The service conducted an evidence gap mapping to identify knowledge and accountability gaps in areas that are strategically important to UN Women. The results of this analysis will help to focus our efforts to conduct and to advocate for the most strategic and important evaluation activities to take place. Next slide, please. On decentralized evaluations, and these are the evaluations that are planned, budgeted for, initiated, and managed by management with technical assistance and quality assurance provided by our regional evaluation specialists and staff. In 2019, 36 decentralized evaluations were completed, and in 2019, to support transparency, accountability, use, and learning, we introduced a synopsis of key decentralized evaluations in the annual report. In 2019, we also enhanced our evaluation practice by launching a pilot implementation modality where the Independent Evaluation Service staff assumes a greater role for leading and conducting strategic evaluations, such as country portfolio evaluations, to enhance the quality and insightfulness of their analysis, to maintain in-house and to build our cumulative knowledge of UN Women's challenges, constraints, and levers for success, and to further strengthen their independence. This model has proven successful and we have expanded it further in 2020. Next slide, please. The service tracks the performance of UN Women in the area of evaluation across 8 key performance indicators. The global results of these indicators are presented in the annual report. In 2019, we saw good performance in the majority of indicators. Where I would like to speak in more detail are the indicators on evaluation coverage, evaluation implementation rates, and quality of evaluation reports. Next slide, please. On evaluation coverage, we measure the number of offices with at least 1 evaluation per strategic note cycle. And in 2019, UN Women hit 86%, which is positive and represents an increase from 84% in 2018. Of the 8 field offices that did not complete any evaluation to date, 5 country offices had initiated at least one evaluation in 2019, including the country portfolio evaluation of our Nigeria country office, which was led by the Independent Evaluation Service. We will continue to monitor this indicator, but to further support strong evaluation coverage, we have also clarified and revised our evaluation coverage norms. On evaluation implementation rates, here we measure the number of planned evaluations that are implemented. And this includes corporate independent evaluations, as well as the large complement of decentralized evaluations. In 2019, UN Women hit 77% in this area. While this represents a good achievement, it also represents a slight decrease from last year. On further analysis, we can see that the decrease could be in part due to the fact that the number of planned evaluations, the denominator, mainly decentralized evaluations, has increased from 70 evaluations in 2018 to 81 in 2019. Thus, the ambition of evaluation activities increased. This is an area that we need to analyze further to ensure that a realistic number of the right evaluations are planned. I would caution against potential fragmentation in evaluation planning, and which in some cases a target spend on KPIs could proliferate. And in some cases, we see that some learning and accountability needs that can be served from evaluation may be better covered through larger, more strategic, more independent evaluations, such as corporate evaluations and their in-depth case studies, country portfolio evaluations, and regional evaluations. Nevertheless, last year we took steps to further strengthen our processes for monitoring the implementation of evaluations through our internal reporting tools and processes, and we will continue to monitor and advocate for the right number of evaluations to take place. And finally, on the quality of evaluation reports. This is a measure of the ex-post external quality assessment based on a review of the evaluation reports. In 2018, we raised the bar in terms of the benchmark from satisfactory or fair and above to good and above, and in doing so set UN Women a higher standard to reach. In 2019, the number of evaluations, independent, corporate, and decentralized, rated as good and above based on the external quality assessment of the contents of the evaluation reports was 68%. And in that figure, I am pleased to report that all independent and corporate evaluations were rated as good and above. If we apply how UN Women used to measure evaluation report quality, we would see that 36 out of the 38 reports were fair and above, or essentially satisfactory and above. However, to continue to support management in ensuring quality decentralized evaluation activities, we are taking the following steps. We are taking the lead in conducting key strategic decentralized evaluations, and this should bring with it a higher level of internal quality assessment throughout the process from inception to finalization, with the sign-off at the highest levels in the Independent Evaluation Service. Starting in 2020, rather than performing an external assessment at what time at the end of the year, we are establishing a near-time assessment process, which will provide feedback throughout the year on quality for timely review and quality improvement. We will continue to enhance evaluation guidance materials and make it available to staff and M&E focal points who manage decentralized evaluations. We will look at establishing stronger regional rosters of consultants for decentralized evaluations. And finally, we will also have on standby contract as needed support to engage in technical support and quality assurance where, for example, our staff may not be able to provide the optimal level of technical assistance and quality assurance, due in part to the fact that sometimes some decentralized evaluations in some regions occur all at one time, and it may not be feasible for one regional evaluation specialist to clear and to provide assistance in that regard. Next slide, please. Turning now to our important work on UN system-wide coordination for gender responsive evaluation, and in brief, due to due regard for time, the Independent Evaluation Service continues to actively engage with the United Nations Evaluation Group, where we co-convene the Human Rights and Gender Equality Working Group. Further details of our support in this area are included in our annual report, but here I would like to highlight 2 points that further demonstrate our strong support for UN system-wide gender responsive evaluation. In 2019, we led an interagency meta-synthesis of UNDAF evaluations with a gender lens and have recently published this. And we continue to serve as secretariat for the UN SWOP evaluation performance indicator. Next slide, please. We continue to engage in focused national evaluation capacity developments, such as contributions to specific country-led evaluations. In 2019, we delivered targeted workshops and trainings, including on the inclusive systemic evaluation for gender equality, environment, and marginalized voices, methodological approach, as well as on using big data for evaluation. And we continued our partnership with Eval Gender Plus in disseminating findings of the voluntary national reviews of the SDGs with a focus on how evidence on gender has been used to inform development. Next slide, please. Before closing my presentation, I would like to speak briefly about evaluation in the context of COVID-19. And similar to, as I just explained in our internal audit section, similarly for evaluation, COVID has been a major disruptor to our evaluation work, but it similarly presents an important time to be adaptive, agile, and responsive for the learning and accountability needs of UN Women. From the very beginning, we have been an active but independent observer to UN Women's programmatic and operational working groups to respond to COVID-19, which has helped us to contribute evaluative evidence from previous crises, as well as to understand potential evaluable areas. We will continue to work in these areas and to engage actively in these working groups. As for our evaluation plans, our ability to travel to the field to carry out field missions, our access to some internal and external stakeholders, as well as our ability to collect evidence has been affected. We are seeking to adapt using remote collection methods where possible and in tailoring our work. And despite these limitations, we still believe there is value and accountability in continuing our evaluations in these adapted forms with these limitations. And we're quite excited about looking at some real-time evaluation opportunities in the regions as well. In relation to the strategic plan evaluation assessment, we are pleased that this work is continuing, albeit in adapted and constrained context, building on the results of the midterm review. This key evaluation activity will focus on studying the flagship initiatives and thematic priorities as implementation vehicles for the strategic plan. And the service is planning to present this report to the Executive Board in March 2021. Next slide, please. So with that, I would like to close our presentation. I hope that it has helped to highlight some of the most important work that we've delivered in evaluation last year. Rich details are available in the annual report as well as in the individual evaluation report. I'd like to end by reiterating our support to UN Women to support its accountability and learning needs. I would like to thank our independent evaluation service staff for their commitment and for their hard work in 2019. And I would just like to reemphasize our strong commitment to maintain a high quality UN Women evaluation function that promotes accountability and learning, to ensure that evaluations foster corporate change that is positive, and to ensure the integration of gender equality perspectives of women within the UN system and beyond. Thank you for your continued support, and I pass the chair back to you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Lisa. And following your presentation, I'm pleased once again to invite the Deputy Executive Director, Ms. Bhatia, to respond on behalf of the UN Women Management. So, Anita, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. We are very pleased to note that we have a very strong evaluation function in UN Women, and we believe that this strong evaluation function actually makes us a better organization. And we would like to assure you that we as management will continue to ensure high coverage, quality, and use of evaluations. In a previous presentation, one of the speakers asked, and the Audit Advisory Committee noted that they would like to understand how we use evaluations. And we just want to assure you that the management team is fully aligned with the view that evaluations are only useful if you take their findings and actually do something with them. So this is what we have been doing, and this is what we intend to continue to do. In that light, let me note management's appreciation of the updating of the evaluation policy. It was done in a very inclusive way. SMT was consulted, the executive leadership was consulted, and this updated policy is very welcome within the organization. Also want to appreciate, Mr. President, the inputs and discussions that we've had with the executive board members through informals that have also informed our thinking on this process. We would like to say that the evaluation policy changes that were referred to, we view as not being drastic, but actually help UN Women to align in a much better way with UN reform, notably on system-wide evaluations, as well as on the continued good functioning of the independent evaluation and audit services. I'd like to share some facts with you, which we hope will demonstrate that we are making good use of evaluations to improve our organizational performance. First, since 2015, there's actually been an 11% increase in evaluations, and management has a goal to further increase this, not only to inform work in the field, but also our work at headquarters and in the change management processes. A few examples of how we are actually using the information that comes out of evaluations. First of all, in terms of building enhanced capacity on our programmatic interventions, we have tested, as we mentioned yesterday, an initial portfolio review process through the BRC. And in this review process, all projects that were part of the pilot were reviewed to assess whether the project had been itself informed by past evaluations, what lessons were learned, and were these projects sustainable. Second, the strategic notes that the organization puts out are also informed by evaluations and lessons learned. You heard from the last speaker that an evaluation has been undertaken of the coordination function. This is very much informing the work that we have been doing, not just through the pandemic, but will continue to do going forward. The joint evaluations are also informing UN SCDF processes. And as was noted, because evaluations are increasingly country-driven and country-led with support from the decentralized regional evaluation offices, this can really be something that is owned at the country level as well. And because we have moved quite a lot towards country program evaluations, we think this is really helping us to implement our strategic plan better, because we have just-in-time and real-time information that can feed into program design as well as into program management and implementation. So these programmatic evaluations we find to be very useful because they give us a much better sense of our overall footprint, how we are working with other agencies relative to just a project-specific evaluation. The same actually holds true of thematic evaluations as well. In fact, as management, what we would like to see is far fewer project evaluations and much more strategic data on overall thematic or overall programmatic interventions. We will aim to set, going forward, evaluation targets that reflect this, and we would welcome a dialogue with you as members of our executive board on how we can jointly ensure more strategic evaluations. You note, we saw in the presentation that there have been some country evaluations, and just to pick one small example, the Guatemala country portfolio recommendation, portfolio evaluation had very specific recommendations on how UN Women can further enhance our interventions, our coordination function, our strategic interventions, and these have been already fed back into the CCA processes. So that's just one small example, but there are many others of how we are using evaluations to inform our work on the ground. In fact, our COVID-19 response has also been informed by the evaluation that was undertaken of UN Women's work in the development and humanitarian sphere. On Ebola, just to mention that because it was mentioned previously by one of the speakers, there was no formal evaluation done of our role during that response effort, but just to say that actually the lessons from that are also informing our COVID-19 response, particularly on the need to include women in fiscal stimulus packages and the need to ensure a gender-based violence lens across all the work that we do. So in closing, Mr. President, I would just like to reiterate on behalf of myself, OSA, and our executive director, UN Women's management's full support to the evaluation function, our interest in ensuring that evaluations are used more strategically, more meaningfully, not only to inform our programming, but also to help us shape our interactions with others in the UN country team, and to therefore actually help us do a better job in fulfilling our triple mandate. With that, I hand back to you, Mr. President. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anita. And with your presentation, we have now heard all the presentations, and distinguished delegates, the floor is now open for any comments or questions you may have. And again, I encourage you to use the raise hand function. That's the sort of easiest way to get the floor. And first, I would like to give the floor to Switzerland, to Oona Gemsch. The floor is yours, Oona.
Thank you. I just had to unmute myself. Thank you, Mr. President. I make this statement on behalf of Australia, Austria, Belgium, Canada, Denmark, Finland, France, Germany, Iceland, Ireland, Israel, Japan, Liechtenstein, Luxembourg, Mexico, Moldova, the Kingdom of the Netherlands, New Zealand, Norway, Peru, Romania, Sweden, Turkey, the United Kingdom, the United States, and my own country, Switzerland. We thank the Independent Evaluation Service for the presentation of the revised evaluation policy and its annual report, and UN Women for the corresponding management response. The report confirms that UN Women has established a high-quality, independent, and impactful evaluation function. In this intervention, we would like to highlight the following points. First, on governance. We welcome the new evaluation policy. We are pleased that UN Women has aligned their policy with those of other funds and programs, and has taken into account the changing context of the UNDS reform and internal change management. We particularly appreciate a dedicated chapter on system-wide and joint evaluation and UN Women's role in ensuring gender-responsive evaluations across the UN system. We are confident that this revised evaluation policy offers a solid basis for UN Women's evaluation function to operate soundly and support learning, accountability, and high-performing programs. However, we want to highlight that sufficient resources are crucial. The draft policy sets a range for resource allocation from 2 to 3% of its total program expenditure. For us, the upper end of the range is a goal we are aiming for. This range should also guide the financial allocations for the evaluation function in country and regional offices. Further, we would like to underscore that the role the Advisory Committee on Oversight has been given in the revised evaluation policy calls for evaluation expertise among the committee members. Second, on performance. We congratulate the IES on the high level of evaluation performance. However, we note the drop in some key performance indicators, particularly the continuing drop in the financial resources invested in evaluation function, the evaluation implementation rate, and of particular concern, the quality of evaluation reports. We strongly urge UN Women to pay attention to the 5 areas recording performance issues in 2019 and ensure they reach their targets by 2021. This can be done through 1, strengthening capacity at country level to ensure a high quality evaluation function at all levels within UN Women. 2, continuing IES-led country portfolio evaluations to focus more on strategic evaluations and on higher level results, and continue to strengthen the response to evaluations and uptake of key insights. In this regard, we welcome the 2020 program of work. We continue to support the strengthened focus on use of evaluation and the link to knowledge management. First results indicate that this approach is bearing fruit. We further welcome the additional information provided on decentralized evaluations in this regard. We agree with the Advisory Committee on Oversight in that we would be interested in how the different reporting systems work together to provide an overall picture of the uses of evaluation findings in program improvement or management accountability. Thirdly, on the annual report, we appreciated the detailed analysis provided on each KPI in past reports. The overview on performance in each region allowed us to see the bigger picture within UN Women and get a feel for the decentralized evaluation function. We believe that this type of information enriches our work as Executive Board and strongly encourage UN Women to reintroduce this analysis into their annual reports. We remain committed to supporting the IES in their important role in fostering learning, accountability, and evidence-based decision-making and programming on gender equality within UN Women, the UN system, and beyond. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Oona. And next on my list, I have Guzal Kusanova from the Permanent Representation of Russia. So, Guzal, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, we would like to thank the Director of IAS for presenting the report on the evaluation function of UN Women for 2019, as well as the management of UN Women for sharing their perspective. We support the continuing efforts on strengthening the independent evaluation function in UN Women, and we urge the entity to continue working to safeguard the independence of the independent evaluation. Mr. President, we carefully considered the revised evaluation policy of UN Women, and while we appreciate the efforts of IAS to streamline the document in comparison to the current evaluation policy, we noted that the terminology used in the revised policy doesn't fully correspond with the strategic plan of UN Women for 2018-2021. And in this regard, we ask UN Women to bring the language of the policy in line with the strategic plan and present the updated version at the second regular session of the Executive Board for further consideration. And in conclusion of my remark, Mr. President, I would like to express my delegation's appreciation for the openness and readiness of IAS to engage closely with the Executive Board and address concerns and questions that arise. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Guzal. And I see no further request for the floor at this stage. So I would like to give both Lisa and Anita the opportunity to respond. Let's start with Lisa, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and thank you, distinguished excellencies, for your interventions. Let me thank both Switzerland on behalf of the group and also the Russian Federation for their interventions in supporting a strong evaluation function within UN Women. Responding to the points from the distinguished delegate from Switzerland on the evaluation policy and governance arrangements, I would just like to speak briefly on the range for evaluation, that indeed it has been moved from a target of 3% to a range between 2 and 3%. The rationale behind that has been looking at giving more flexibility towards the terms that we want our programs and projects to be longer term within UN Women, but also because a financial spend KPI in and of itself doesn't necessarily tell us everything about the quality of evaluation in terms of its insight and findings. There's a question, I think, with regards to the proportionality of allocation towards evaluation, whereby you could have a very material, large program that could be very easy to evaluate, but you could also have a very complex, smaller program. So I think it's just important to recognize that this proportionality of 3% or 2 to 3% cannot be seen as something that is proportionate dependent upon the project size. Nevertheless, I think that the range provides a good protection in terms of budgets. We've seen UN Women be very committed towards protecting resources for evaluation with regards to throughout the change management process. The division of IEAS was one of the few fortunate divisions where we were not asked to look to rationalize our resources. But I would also, in terms of looking at the right evaluations to take place at the right time, I'm very interested in hitting and looking at evaluation coverage. So looking at the overall universe of what could be evaluated, country offices, headquarters units, programming modalities, and then to try to see from that universe, how are we hitting and how are we covering the whole universe of entities to be evaluated. But we will continue to monitor to make sure that resources are protected for evaluation and that the right evaluations take place. On the KPIs, thank you for your note about the drop, and as presented, I tried to provide some insight in terms of the steps that we're taking to further address them. I think the distinguished delegate of Switzerland also highlighted 2 key points with regards to strengthening capacity at the country level. And we see that as so key, because I think if you look at country offices or program presences that only have a focal point for evaluation, it's not sufficient bandwidth for such a person who has many other tasks to be able to focus on providing the right level of attention to evaluation at the country level. So I think this is so important and so critical, and it comes down to human resources and making sure that we have the right people in the right positions. We've seen so many monitoring and evaluation colleagues at the field stretched so far, and the resources can be drawn in terms of engaging in planning to reporting, donor reporting. So it's really important that the focus of colleagues at the country level and really have the attention to be able to devote to decentralized evaluation. And thank you for also noting the point on the IEAS-led evaluations, because I really believe that by conducting and leading these evaluations ourselves with our understanding of, with our independence, but understanding of the organization, which we build up over time through visiting and evaluating many programs and projects, that this can really result in really much more rich analysis and much more rich recommendations, and also holding management to account and greater buy-in to evaluation recommendations. On the overview of the regional KPIs, thank you for that. We have heard your feedback. We're happy to reintroduce that into the report. We do track at the regional level. And just to say that for our 2019 annual report, with the view to word count, providing further information on the evaluation policy, and the view that we wanted to actually change some of the focus in the evaluation report to really focus on what are the results of some of these decentralized evaluations and what are they telling us. We had to make a cut somewhere. So we provided the global figures, but we took out the regional, but we're happy to reintroduce the regional information next year. And thank you to the distinguished delegate from the Russian Federation. I have heard your intervention about the policy reflecting older terminology and not being in line with the strategic plan. I would just like to highlight that the policy was based on the 2013 policy, and we made some light revisions in the areas as I previously explained. However, we would be open to further understanding where terminology in the strategic plan could be brought further up to date so that these align. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for your answers. And next, I would like to give the floor to Mary Wirsch to sort of comment on ACO membership before sort of giving the floor to Anita. So Mary, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. President and distinguished colleagues. I wanted to respond to the intervention from the representatives from Switzerland with regard to the capacity on the ACO for evaluation, and to particularly highlight that we have 4 new members of the Advisory Committee on Oversight, and we're mindful of the responsibilities we have had for looking at evaluation, and now which are enhanced by our new terms of reference. And to point out that Mr. Robert Leahy of Canada is one of our new members and has had extensive experience in evaluation as the head of the Center for Excellence in Evaluation in the Canadian government, Director of Evaluation for the Public Service Commission of Canada, and now has extensive interactions in consulting work with international organization and UN agencies. So we recruited specifically for that skill. Other members have been customers of evaluation and overseers of evaluation in other modes. So I just want to note that. I also want to note that the ACO has been fairly consistent in this year's report and the last year report about not using a percentage number for effectiveness and relevance of evaluation. There's a whole range of activities which IES is taking up. Anita Bhatia talked about the UN Women's commitment to using evaluation, to improving it. There's lots of ways to make evaluation effective, relevant, and present to the organization without a percentage increase. And we have felt that for a long time and continue to do that. And so we have made a number interventions with IEAS and with the ED and UN Women about coverage and about emphasis on strengthening the first and second lines of defense that evaluation has pointed out need to be strengthened. And so we think there's a synergy there, and that's what UN Women should focus on. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Those are the comments I wanted to make.
Thank you so much, Mary. And next, I would like to give the floor to Anita Bhatia, our Deputy Executive Director. Anita, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. We first, just to appreciate very much the interventions by the distinguished representatives from Switzerland on behalf of Switzerland and the other countries that issued that statement, as well as the statement from the Russian Federation. Thank you very much for those statements. Most of the specifics actually have been addressed by Lisa, so I would just like to make two broad cross-cutting remarks. One is on the capacity level in the offices. I was very struck as I was listening to Lisa about the comment that Norway had made yesterday, actually asking about what are some of the implications of not having sufficient core funding. And actually, this is one of them, because on the ground level, while we do have some decentralized capacity around evaluation, when an evaluation takes place, it actually requires a lot of people in that office to collect data, to collect reports, to sit with the people, to be interviewed, to provide information. On the field, our planning and coordination specialists are very stretched. And so sometimes our capacity to actually get evaluations done and then to have these often very junior people take these evaluation results to management and say, please take them seriously, is compromised because some of these people are not there for the long term. So actually, and just coming back to this issue of core resources, what I was really struck by in the last few interventions is that this is a function that we at management have really fought to protect. As Lisa said, during the change management effort, one of the few functions where there wasn't some change was this, because we do see it as valuable. And yet we find that our ability to sufficiently harvest and leverage the very good work that comes out of these reports is compromised by the degree of flexible and predictable funding we have. Finally, I would just say that the link to the strategic plan, we hear the comment made, and as Lisa has said, they will take this into account. But I would just like to assure everyone that we, as part of the group that will be leading on the next strategic plan, will be looking at what the evaluations are telling us, both from a thematic perspective, for example, on humanitarian and development, on coordination, for example, from coordination, as well as from our operational and country footprint, so that we're able to tie together the work both on change management, country typology, to the strategic plan. So we really see this as very practical, useful, valuable, and will continue to support this. We do not believe that a financial target is essential for the support. Rather, it is the cultural change in UN Women where management and managers feel that this is something useful and that that degree of self-reflection actually improves the organization. Thank you, Mr. President. Over.
Thank you so much, Anita, and I can echo what you said about the importance of core funding, that core funding is so important in terms of sort of ensuring that for efficient management and results, and we should sort of, always underline that sort of core funding is really the best sort of funding for the organization. Since there are no further comments or statements, we can actually conclude our discussion on this agenda item, and this is probably good because, well, I understand that there is still hard work to be done on the 4 decisions, and let me just sort of repeat what I said at the outset this morning in a way that, I know that sort of progress has been made, but I don't think that we finished sort of the negotiations on any of the four decisions. So I would very much like to encourage delegations to be flexible and pragmatic. I am a bureaucrat at heart, so meeting deadlines is always sort of important for me. But at the same time, I would like to underline that, that substance comes before expediency in a way that we have to be very mindful of the sort of of the contents of those decisions, and I really want to ensure that we can reach outcomes that are sort of good for the whole membership of UN Women. So there is hard work ahead. I am available for the negotiations if needed, and I would perhaps like to give now the floor to Jean-Luc just to sort of remind us of the sort of how the rest of the day will sort of play out in terms of the timetable. So Jean-Luc, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And I haven't had time to consult with you, but I think the way forward, since we are finishing a bit early now, is 12:20. We had planned to resume the negotiation around 1:15, but since, as you said, we haven't made as many progress we would have wished on the decisions, so we could start at 12:30, and as you proposed, Mr. President, if you could be in the room, that would be highly appreciated. Also, because Finland, of course, is a facilitator for the first decision on the executive director report and on the MTR. So, so the plan would be that at 12:30 we resume the negotiation with the first decision with you, Mr. President, in the room. I understand there is already a facilitator's proposal floating around, and we could go through it and hopefully close as many paragraphs as possible. And then we will keep going with the 3 other decisions until we have a consensus on the 4 decisions. Hopefully that happened before 3 p.m. And then we resume the official session as planned and we endorse the decision. If that doesn't happen, then we will circulate an email to the entire membership to let them know how much delay we will face, and then we will resume within 50 minutes of one of my emails saying, okay, we are done with the decision, so please let's regroup. Knowing that, of course, we do have to endorse those 4 decisions today before closing of business, otherwise we will unfortunately have to postpone them. So that's my input, Mr. President. So I repeat, we will see each other at 12:30 in 10 minutes, and we will start with negotiation of decision 2020/3 on the executive director report and the midterm review. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you so much, Mr. Secretary, and it sounds like a good plan, and let's hope that we can sort of resume at 3 o'clock as planned, and then with the decisions ready. But there is still time today, and my evening is open, so I will take the time that we need. But I would again sort of repeat my appeal to all delegations to be sort of pragmatic and let's try to reach sort of a conclusion during this lunchtime. So I will go after my sandwiches. I like mine so much from yesterday, so I made the same ones this morning, and sort of and I will see you in the negotiations at and again, in a way, was it sort of 20 to 1 or 1:30?
Sorry, at 12:30. I said
12:30. So
yes.
We will see each other in just a couple of minutes. But I want to thank sort of all colleagues and UN Women colleagues for being here this morning, and a good discussion. And so we are adjourning the annual session and looking forward to seeing you this afternoon. So thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. President.